Okay, so today we're going to look at verifying trig identities again. We're going to call this day 2. What happens from day 1 to day 2 is that we may have to change both sides of the equation, and so that we can show that one side equals another side, or maybe we don't. So let's look at this one here. This one looks really complicated, but let's check it out. We have cotangent of theta times the secant of theta times cosecant squared of theta minus cotangent cubed of theta secant theta equals cosecant of theta. Now, on this particular problem, really, cosecant, remember how we talked about yesterday, that's pretty simplified. I'm going to leave it. We're going to do one next where both sides are kind of crazy, but this one looks pretty simplified. This side, on the other hand, the left side looks like craziness. So always go with my rules. Number 1, can I factor anything? That's always what I ask myself first, because that makes life easier if you factor out stuff. And if you notice, on this side, they both have a cotangent and they both have a secant. I'm going to factor out a cotangent of theta, secant of theta. And when I do, if I take one out of here, a cotangent and a secant, I end up with cosecant squared theta minus, and if I take them out of here, I would just have a cotangent squared theta equals cosecant of theta. All right, so we factored. Second rule, is anything squared? Yeah. This is squared, and this is squared. Now, if you look at your identities, I'm just going to kind of write this in green. One of your identities, or should I write it up here? One of your identities says that cotangent squared of x plus 1 equals cosecant squared of x. So what that means is cosecant squared minus cotangent squared, if I bring it over there, is going to equal 1. So this whole thing, since we factored, this whole thing can just be 1. So you get 1 times cotangent of theta, secant of theta, equals cosecant of theta. Okay? We use Pythagorean identity. Next step. Nothing else works. Rewrite in terms of sine and cosine. Cotangent. Cotangent is cosine of theta over the sine of theta times secant. Secant would be 1 over the cosine. We might as well change this side. If we're changing one side to sine and cosine, change the other side. This would be 1 over sine of theta. Hopefully you can already see where we're going. We're almost done. You're multiplying so you can cancel. So I have 1 over sine equals 1 over sine. You're done. Those are the exact same thing on the left and right. That one is done. All right, let's look at another one. This one is pretty complex, but it's got one little rule that we use, and you'll see this on your assignment in the next couple minutes. You have 1 minus tangent squared of x over 1 minus cotangent squared of x equals the cosine squared of x minus 1 all over the cosine squared of x. So, here's the deal. Rule 1. Can I factor? No, nothing factors. Is something squared? Number 2. Yeah, lots of things are squared. The problem is 1 minus tangent squared. We know that tangent squared plus 1 equals secant squared. There's no way to make it 1 minus tangent squared. So I'm just going to have to leave that for now. Same thing with the denominator. We know that cotangent squared plus 1 equals cosecant squared. So there's no way to make this 1 minus cotangent squared. There's no way to do that. All right, next one squared is cosine squared minus 1. Well, we know that cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. So that one, if we do a little bit of algebra, if I move the 1 here and move the sine squared there, I would end up with cosine squared minus 1 equals sine squared. No, that would equal negative sine squared when I moved it over there. So negative sine squared, we could put that in right there. All right, so let's give it a try. There's nothing we can do with the tangent. So 1 minus tangent squared of x all over 1 minus cotangent squared of x equals negative sine squared of x over cosine squared of x. Okay. Well, now I see different ways of doing this right now. So remember I said there's always different ways of doing this. Some ways are shorter than the others. And I actually want to show you something that you can do on a problem like this right here. I call it cross multiply. And you've all learned how to do it with proportions. Do you see how you have a fraction equal to a fraction? That's a proportion. So you can cross multiply. I can take this numerator times this denominator, and then I could take this denominator times this numerator and set them equal. So I'm going to take 1 minus tangent squared, I'm going to use parentheses because that's a quantity, times cosine squared. I'm going to set that equal to negative sine squared times the quantity 1 minus cotangent squared. Now I've gotten rid of my fractions. Now I have to do algebra. So I'm going to distribute here and here. So cosine squared minus cosine squared tangent squared equals negative sine squared plus, because you have a negative and a negative, sine squared cotangent squared. Now, I understand things are still squared, but you're multiplying like a cosine squared times a tangent squared. So since I'm multiplying, what I would do is rewrite it all in terms of sine and cosine. So this stays cosine squared minus cosine squared, and tangent squared is sine squared over cosine squared equals, this one I can't change, so negative sine squared plus sine squared. And now cotangent I can change. Cotangent is cosine squared over sine squared. And I hope now that I wrote those like that, you're noticing once again that you're multiplying. So for example, on the left side, this cosine and this cosine cancel. And I end up with cosine squared minus sine squared. And on the right side, you have a sine squared and a sine squared, so they cancel. So I have negative sine squared plus cosine squared. Now, those are the same thing. We all know that because we've been through pre-algebra. Those are the same thing. So I'm done. See you in class tomorrow.